Hi, everybody. Welcome to Kindred Skulls. My name's Matt Freese. I'm here with my co-host Nick Olson, who just had a great day going against Jair Alexander on Twitter today, so it's phenomenal for him. And we also have a special guest tonight. We're really excited to bring on Shawn Syed at Syed Schemes on Twitter. He's writing this season for the Daily Norseman. He, has posted a number of great videos on Twitter, and we're really, really excited to have him on for this show. We were DMing kind of before the Packers game even happened, and I said to him, "We'll have to have you on when the Vikings have a great schematic game," and it happened in Week 1. So we have you on the show today, Shawn. Welcome. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you so much, Matt and Nick. It's great to be on a podcast with just such an incredible pun name. And yeah, Matt, maybe we need to kind of DM every week because I'm new to Vikings fan pessimism, but everyone of you guys that I DM, like, hey, maybe Vikings are going to beat the Packers this week. A lot of, oh, don't worry, you'll get over that soon. But so happy to be here. I grew up in New Jersey, got to play high school ball there under my brother, who was a college passing game coordinator and a student assistant at a school. We got lucky when he came back in a system. I'm not going to call it a Shanahan McVay system, but certainly kind of a progression passing game, and got to be used in 2 high looks at a time when maybe before it was super cool. So I've been really lucky in the resources that have been shared with me, and just, it's a kids game that we all here love, and just learning about it one clip at a time.
Yeah, awesome. And we are going to go deep today into what the Vikings did in this game. Shawn, you've probably tweeted out almost the entire game on Twitter, so that'll be great reference material. Obviously, we don't have video with us. It's just hard to do that in a podcast format that we're going to send out. It would probably be, we do have the YouTube video. That would be great, but a lot of our listeners listen on podcasts, so we don't want to do that dirty to you. But a lot of this stuff you're going to be able to catch on his Twitter. He's tweeted out almost like every single play of the game. It's pretty great stuff. But why don't we jump in and just kind of talk a little bit high level about the Vikings game? Obviously, we dominated the Packers 23-7. If you've been living under a rock the past couple days, and really it was from the jump. I think we kind of made a statement on that opening drive, right? There was a big play to Justin Jefferson on that opening drive, and then we also went forward on fourth and 1, kind of starting the season, scored the touchdown with a really nice play design where we kind of had just a double motion and got Justin Jefferson wide open in the corner. That was really nice. Obviously, Jefferson, I've said his name like 5 times now, was a huge story of the game. 186 yards, 184 yards, one of those two, 20 yards a reception on the game. Kirk found him open, like he was running wide open, and I think that's part of what Kevin O'Connell has brought to the offense. On the defensive side of the ball, we totally shut down the Packers. Obviously we sacked Aaron Rodgers 4 times, intercepted it once, had 2 fourth down stops, including a goal line stand that prevented a touchdown. And then finally, Greg Joseph. We kind of talked about him last week a little bit, Nick, but money 56-yard field goal. Honestly, I kind of forgot to watch the third field goal he made, which is something that doesn't really happen with Vikings kickers. Shawn, I know you're new to the whole Vikings thing, but
Joseph kicked a 56-yarder. He tied the team record, and nobody's even talking about it. We're just like, oh yeah, he does that now, which is like, that's not how Vikings kickers work. But yeah, that special teams was phenomenal too. So just couldn't have scripted it any better. It was actually, I don't know if I'd call it the best defensive performance against the Packers, but it was the first time we've ever held Aaron Rodgers to single digit points, like ever. Never did that, going back to like 2000s, like when Rodgers took over. So on top of, Justin Jefferson having a pretty incredible day, pretty much clicking on all cylinders in all 3 phases. So it was awesome to see.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there were some takeaways too from the game just overall, and we'll get into more of the specifics. Like, the offense wasn't as efficient as possible, right? Obviously, we only scored 23 points. If you have an absolutely phenomenal day on offense, you're probably considering scoring into the 30-40 point range. And then on defense, I think AJ Dillon kind of showed a couple things against our offense that may need to be shored up later in the season, but we'll kind of get to that as we go along here. So we're going to flip right away into the offense. And Shawn, why don't you just give us a rundown of the basics of this offense that we're looking at under Kevin O'Connell? Obviously, it's similar to the Kubiak family tree, but there are some major differences.
Yeah, I think that you can definitely consider him, a leaf of the Sean McVay tree, at least. just the basics, 11 personnel. CJ Ham is someone who's close to my heart, but you're probably going to see him a little bit less on the field this year. Lots of shifts and motions. I think in any interview with any of these guys you ever hear, they call it the illusion of complexity, right? They want to give you different pictures for the same concepts. And I think it's effective when used effectively, right? And the early touchdown is a good example of that, where you start in a look, you send one guy to the other side and motion someone else. You're flipping numbers and you're flipping leverage, right? It's a fight for space on a football field. And the way you get there is with numbers and leverage. I was really excited by Kevin O'Connell, going for it on 4th and 1, right? Unfortunately, that is something that we do get excited about. Aggression, measured aggression on offense, but also just creative play designs, right? There is a play early on that it's kind of like Dalvin Cook is running out of the backfield, kind of running to the corner, just like a regular sail route, and kind of running that out of the backfield. It's just a nice, unique twist, where I think Washington may have used that this week too. We've seen, Clyde Edwards-Helaire use that when he was at LSU, but to me, it's indicative of someone who understands his personnel, talented offense, and getting those people into the best position for success. And of course, that's going to start with Justin Jefferson. And coming from Los Angeles, where you had Cooper Kupp just have an absolutely phenomenal year, going to Justin Jefferson it's got to be great for O'Connell. I think that's just an amazing turn to go in. And we see it really, really early on in how Jefferson is shifted from side to side, right? So I know there's a lot of discussion on, should Jair have just covered him the whole entire way? There's a separate discussion on, is that the Packers' solution to specific problems? But it's more that, look, Kevin O'Connell gets paid a lot of money, and he's not going to let that happen, right? So he's going to get you into a bunch set, or he's going to motion Jefferson around to get him into situations where you can't have all your eyes on him, right? Or you can't just press him at the line. And then even when he does, I know Nick posted just a great clip that got a lot of love today, of the one clip where we saw really Jair in press against Jefferson. Jair's an incredible player. Jefferson's also an incredible player, right? And so to use him in that offense, it's going to be a lot of fun. And I think that as O'Connell just keeps on getting more comfortable with his personnel, he's going to get really, really deep in his bag. We saw a lot of play actions that, you said up top. I think the Vikings left some points out there, and 23 points is not what we could have seen, kind of based on how good of a game that was called.
Yeah, so one thing I want to touch on there is something you said at the very beginning, with that illusion of complexity tying into particularly the motions the Vikings are using. And we can talk a little bit about that first Vikings touchdown, the 4th and 1, where we have KJ Osborne motion across the formation. That induces a response by the defense, right? They have to make a check, because now instead of it being 3-by-1, it's 2-by-2, I believe, in that scenario. So in the first place, they have to respond to that. Then quickly we have Justin Jefferson also motion across the formation. So now they've already changed what they're planning to do once. That needs to get communicated across the secondary so everybody's on the same page with what they want to do. And with Justin Jefferson motioning, they have to communicate that a second time, right? So that's 2 separate layers of communications, and it ends up getting screwed up because 2 players go after KJ Osborne. I think Eric Stokes probably should have been the flat control in that type of scheme, but that's just a great example of how a play that's simple for an offense, right? Because they know what's going to happen before it happens. They know where everybody's supposed to be, becomes very difficult for a defense to get communicated across the board.
That's a really good example, because defense in so many ways is reactive, right? As you said, the offense knows exactly what more or less they're going to do, and the defense is responding to that. And, on 4th and 1 in the low red zone, to make such an immediate response through multiple players, what's the communication system? And also, look, Justin Jefferson is an athlete, right? He's not strolling out there like grandma or anything. And to be able to do that at full speed, and really, you just need an inch here or there, and you're going to gain the leverage to get that. So a great example of really a purposeful shift and a purposeful motion, right? I think we talk a lot in NFL circles about, the more motion a team has, the better play is going to be. Now, look, motion eliminates certain things too, right? The person who's running motion, oftentimes they're not going to go vertical, right? The Packers do it, or you kind of motion someone out there quick, but using it in specific ways, particularly when it's married to your run looks, where your run looks look similar to your kind of movement passing, your play action, that boot that Cousins opened the game with, when it's all just looking the same, but it's having different responses, different stimuli for the defense to have to react to quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing is, just with so why don't we flip over to Justin Jefferson specifically, right? Because we got him open a lot of ways in this game. I think the deep over was probably the number one way that Justin Jefferson got his yardage, right? It literally his three biggest catches were on deep. I'd call them, deep six routes, right? They weren't posts down the vertical of the field. They were where he was crossing the formation, getting wide open, and we did that a couple of different ways. But do you want to go ahead and go through those deep overs?
Yeah, I think that the big deep over that I'm thinking of is the one where the concept's one of the ways to call it is called wave. Basically, two kind of posts or cross-ish from one side, and then a lower over coming from the other. And the defense is in cover three, so just kind of thinking numbers wise, right? There's going to be three deep defenders, and they do have a nickel defender carrying. So it really is 4-on-3 for the defense, which in theory you would love that. But with the speed at which everyone's going and what the communication system is, looks like on the clip, there's like a little bit of communication error between Jair and maybe one other person thinking, okay, someone should be dropping off of one of these routes onto Jefferson, right? And on the offensive end, you don't care who, quote, messes up. It's not that they did something awful, but you just want to create some opening in some way. And it's a good example of scheming a person open, right? I think that if Justin Jefferson wins Offensive Player of the Year, this isn't the schematic game, or this isn't the game that everyone's going to look at and say, this illustrated all of the amazing tools Justin Jefferson has. I think he's going to look better in other matchups when he is just roasting people, right? But that deep over is something that like the McVay system loves that. And they often do those from kind of condensed sets with really only two receivers. So it's cool to see O'Connell adapt that in a little bit of a different way to have a third receiver. And I think that's a smart way to do it, because if you're facing two high sets, now that example, one of the safeties rolled down, so it was really only a one high look, but adapting your system to that 11 personnel and getting your best guys open, right? And now I'm hopeful that, teams are going to think, okay, Jefferson, and we need to make sure the communication is working solid to get eyes on him. And I think that's going to open up Thielen and Osborne. I'm optimistic that that'll be something that'll be good to look at going forward.
Yeah, so that's actually a question I have for you is, can Jefferson be shut down in this offense with the way it's designed? I think I took a look at Cooper Kupp's numbers from last year. I think Cooper Kupp's worst game in terms of both receptions and receiving yardage was 5 receptions for 65 yards. Obviously, the Vikings have other weapons that they can go to if teams focus in on Justin Jefferson. But with the way Kevin O'Connell was calling this, do you think we're just going to have consistently good matchups for Jefferson, or do you think there are ways for defenses to shut down on him? And what does that open up for Thielen and Osborne then?
Well, look, as a lifelong Vikings fan for the first time for this year, I would love for Justin Jefferson to just be popping off. I will say, in the second half, not that he slowed up, but he wasn't just ripping it up in the second half. Of course, he ends with an incredible stat line. But the clip that we have of him being matched up with one of the linebackers, I think that's a good way to really think about, well, okay, how do we matchup proof someone? And really we do that by putting our guy in a better matchup, right? And so that was a situation where the defense is in a package where they're going to match their best pass defenders to the passing strength. Basically, there's more receivers on one side. That's where we're going to defend, right? They start in bunch. Jefferson motions across. Now it's 2x2, but they start with the tight end on the side Jefferson's motioning to. So technically, the passing strength is still the opposite direction, right? 2 receivers one way and 1 tight end, 1 receiver the other way. And so if you can keep on getting Jefferson into those matchups, it's going to be great, right? I'm interested to see how the Eagles are going to deal with it, because I don't think they're going to be a team that's going to just lock one person in on them. I don't think that's a real response for most teams in the NFL. But attacking 2 high coverage is one of the weakest spots, not necessarily a fully weak spot, but those kind of quarters flat defenders where they're in a bind kind of inside and outside. And look, when you run choice routes, you have options, right? You can go inside, you can go outside. And if you have someone who has that much shake at the top of the route that Jefferson has, he's going to be able to make defenders wrong, right? So I hesitate to say, totally foolproof using him, but I do think he's kind of matchup proof, right? Because there's a clip early on where they're in a 3x1 set, and it was one of the few snaps that the Packers are in real true press man. And he's cooking professional corners, right? He's not someone that I think you're just going to be able to lock down like that. And honestly, I think that the run game is something that helps that, right? If you're going to have a team that's going to roll so many people one way or really, really unfound the whole entire structure of your defense, Dalvin Cook's no joke, right? And I think that being able to use the different parts of the whole entire offense, again, with a play caller that understands, I think, his quarterback ceiling is going to be it's just going to be fun to watch all year.
Yeah, absolutely. And you touched on choice routes a little bit. That was probably where we saw his yardage come, besides the overs. So that's good. Obviously, he did not have as much yardage in the second half. I think part of that is game script oriented, right? The Vikings were up with a lead, so they're not trying to get him the ball as much, or they're not really, they obviously focused on the run, especially in the fourth quarter there. You touched on the run game a little bit as well with Dalvin Cook. What do you have on the run game in terms of what we were doing that was different? I definitely saw some power plays in there as opposed to a mostly zone team, that is maybe different from what a McVay typically does, or what can we expect from this Kevin O'Connell run game?
Yeah, I think McVay is, all those guys there, Alex Gibbs-based and Mike Shanahan, like they want to run wide zone. I think that O'Connell, they ran wide zone weak, which their way of doing it, basically, they're going to bump the running back's aiming point in just a little bit, give the tackle a little bit easier block. I call it mid zone. And so they had that a bunch. And, Dalvin Cook, I love him as a downhill runner. They did have some gap scheme, kind of as you said. I did see a little more inside zone. I know that McVay loves duo, where you're allowing your interior guys to be more vertical and really attack defenders. But they had, as you said, from gun, kind of looks like one back power, may look like kind of like wide trap, really, where that guard is kicking out an end. And that's something that I think the Eagles struggled a little bit with last week, was kind of defending those gun runs from Detroit. So I'm optimistic because, again, CJ Ham, I think he's very talented. And I don't think they dipped super far into that run game, partially because I don't think they really had to. But I do think we're going to see a lot. And I know you can look at the stat line and see how Dalvin Cook ended up and everything, but really game script was dictating a lot of it. So definitely some diversity that I'm excited about, seeing some more interesting stuff from gun, a little more inside zone. And, I think curious to see how CJ Ham is going to continue to be used. Now, I don't think he's going to be Kyle Juszczyk. Of course, Kyle Shanahan, their offense looks very different. But, shout out Arif Hassan writing that piece and CJ Ham getting, 20% of snaps. So I'm happy to see that.
Yeah. Arif writes the piece. Arif says CJ Ham's going to align outside of, the backfield, and he gets like a tight end screen, basically. It was a tight end formation. He gets a screen out of it. So shout out Arif. I want to roll it over to you a little bit right now, Nick, because I know you did a little bit more dive into the individual players. So one of the biggest questions for the Vikings was the offensive line performance. What did you see from our offensive linemen? And, I guess let's shout out three players, because we feel pretty good about Cleveland. We feel pretty good about O'Neal. We've got bigger questions about Darrisaw, Bradbury, and Ingram. So where are we at with those guys?
Yeah, maybe I'll just take it left to right. I thought this was probably Darrisaw's most impressive game as a pro, which isn't I don't want to oversell him, because he's still a young player with, I think, a lot to clean up, frankly. But he's clearly taken a step forward. And, there was a lot of buzz about Darrisaw all offseason being compared to a future Trent Williams. And you actually kind of saw that sort of, you hate to compare him to like Trent Williams, especially last year, because Trent Williams last year was like as good as it gets as at tackle. But you saw that sort of like easy power, just like the heavy hands, just he just like bulldozes guys. And it comes across in the run game and in the pass game. So it's that plus just the crazy movement skills for a big guy. Those things really stood out to me. He still undersets a little bit. He'll give up the edge a little bit. So he won't necessarily gain enough depth in his pass set. And it's not that he doesn't have the capacity to, but I think sometimes he just sort of opens the gate a little bit. And he's able to recover. And a lot of times, he probably only, I think he probably only lost, less than 5 pass set reps. So I thought his pass protection was overall very impressive. But yeah, overall, it was a really impressive game. And I think you're really starting to see why he got so much hype as, a significantly improved player. In the run game.
One thing on Darrisaw real quick in pass pro that I think he needs to clean up a little bit is And part of this was Cousins' aiming points. I think he drifted back a couple times, but there were rushers, and I think it was Preston Smith, and maybe Rashawn Gary did it once, who got to Cousins at the top of his drop or close to the top of his drop a couple times. It didn't end up being a sack, but I'd like to see Darisaw get a little bit more push behind in the pocket. But I otherwise I agree with you. I thought he was phenomenal. There was a rep where he anchored really well against Kenny Clark.
Yeah, I mean, he had multiple pass pro reps where he basically pancaked Rashawn Gary across from him. And Rashawn Gary is a very, very good player. I mean, maybe Vikings fans don't realize it because he's an ascending player rather than he's been around. He's like a 5-time Pro Bowler. He's like a player who's kind of just arriving as one of the best edge rushers in the NFL. But he is, and and Preston Smith, phenomenal player as well. Preston Smith actually, I thought, had a really impressive game. Was going toe for toe with Brian O'Neill, who we know is a Pro Bowler on the other side, and then add in Kenny Clark. And this is a really tough matchup, I think, for this offensive line. And it was a tough test. And I think they came away, I'm not going to say looking like amazing or unscathed, but I thought there was impressive stuff from everybody here. So that's Darisaw. Impressive, promising, still a few things to clean up. I would say Ezra Cleveland maybe had the argument for the best offensive lineman on the line. And granted, he was not matched up he probably had the easiest matchups of all 5 guys on the line because part of it was because Kenny Clark was picking on Bradbury and Ed Ingram, picking on the rookie and picking on the guy we know struggles in pass pro. But Cleveland had a couple of really impressive reps. They really like him as a puller, and he's phenomenal as a puller, and he's phenomenal in space. So his run blocking really stands out. But I don't normally think of him as as a plus pass protector, but he was really good this year. I liked the way he used his hands, the way he was catching guys. His head was on a swivel. He decked a guy, was looking for work and decked a guy who was engaged with Christian Darisaw. So that was really good to see him looking for work. And I think he had a clean sheet in pass pro. So we've always known that Cleveland's got high potential, high athleticism. I've had some questions about how he might hold up in pass protection, given he's a little undersized. It hasn't really put it together, but this was a really promising game from Cleveland. I don't know if you'd add anything on top of that there.
Yeah, for Cleveland, I thought he looked really great. There was a really nice screen play that he got out in front of. Obviously, that's kind of what we've been expecting from him from the athleticism. And like you said, a clean sheet in pass protection, and that's about all you can ask for from an offensive lineman.
Yeah. Bradbury, it was kind of like I was telling people it was like a standard Bradbury game where like the pass protection was like really bad. Granted, he was going up against Kenny Clark, who knows he can kind of abuse him a lot. So anytime you get that one-on-one matchup, it's probably going to be not in his favor. But he also had some really good run blocks, and especially in the screen game, he had multiple screen pass, and you can tell they're designing their screen game a little bit around what Bradbury can do as blocking downfield, because he gets out so fast and is just ahead of everybody, and he's able to sort of scream out. So it was nice to see them. They had a couple screens, I think, where it was just kind of Bradbury. There was the one guy leaking and releasing out. So that was impressive to see. But yeah, I mean, this is a guy who at this point, I think it's safe to say like he's not going to fix a lot of these issues in pass protection. He's kind of stagnated in terms of what he can handle there. So
yeah. And with Bradbury, to me, it only it impacts a handful of plays a game, right, in pass protection, which is bad. Like, you can't have an offensive lineman who's a quality starter in the league, I would say, who has that level of mishaps. But, like, in this play, it was probably 2 or 3 reps from Kenny Clark where he beat him really cleanly. There was actually one rep where it was like a Danielle Hunter rep. You were talking about Danielle Hunter with the tight ends, but, like, he beat Ed Ingram immediately, and then he beat Garrett Bradbury immediately back to back. It was pretty rough. But let's flip it over to Ed Ingram.
Yeah, Ingram, so he's the most interesting, I think, because he's the rookie, and we knew he'd have some rookie moments, and he certainly did have them. Kenny Clark, I think, kind of knew that the rookie coming in would struggle a little bit. So he, a lot of different issues. It wasn't just one thing in pass protection. He kind of overset on one time and opened himself to an arm over. He got pulled. I mean, Kenny Clark can beat you so many different ways too. He got bull rushed. So there's a lot of different ways. And the other thing is, like, Clark is so darn quick that, like, it can take just one moment of hesitation or just like not setting, 6 inches too far, 6 inches not far enough, and then boom, he's just dead. And there were reps like that where he was just gone in a blink of an eye, and Ed Ingram looked like he thought it was a game or a stunt, and he's like, oh, I'm just gonna pass it off. Oh wait, nobody's there. That wasn't a game. That was just his move. So yeah, there's some things to clean up there. Definitely, I mean, rough, not what you want. I will say for both Bradbury and Ingram, Cousins had some really impressive pocket presence in this game that kind of ameliorated a lot of the issues. It probably would have looked a lot worse if it weren't for the fact that there was that corner route that went through Jefferson's hand, through the tips of Jefferson's hands in the low red zone. And there, Kenny Clark was coming screaming down right the middle of the pocket, and Cousins was able to just sort of sidestep it, keep his eyes up, and toss that pass to Jefferson that unfortunately wasn't able to bring it in. But the pocket presence was great, and there you saw that on a couple different occasions. Climbing the pocket on that play action shot we discussed earlier on the deep crosser. So that helps a little bit. So hopefully Cousins can keep that up going forward. I will say Ingram in the run game, as bad as he was in the pass game, I was really impressed, was really encouraged by what he did in the run game. Just another easy mover. I'm not used to seeing the Vikings run a lot of duo and move bodies in duo, but Ingram was opening big holes in duo. He looked good as a polar as well. So a lot of the thing, kind of when I was scouting him coming out of LSU, I had some questions about okay, I like it physically, I like his profile, but I wouldn't have necessarily picked him for the wide zone, or I guess more mid zone type scheme that we're going to be running here. But he's athletically, he seems sufficient, and you saw that in this game, and in the way he was able to pull and the way he was able to climb to the second level. So that was all really encouraging, and just the way he was able to sort of generate movement, torque, latch on to guys. He's got such strong grip, and he's good pad level, good use of leverage to sort of generate movement and torque in the run game. So that was really encouraging. And then Brian O'Neill, I'll say he battled. I thought he was really impressive as a run blocker. I'll spend a little bit less time on O'Neill because at this point, I think we kind of know who he is, what he's good at, what he's not. Phenomenal run blocker. They were really using him and his athleticism well in the run game. And I'm excited to see how they use that. We didn't see as much sweeps or getting O'Neill out in space as much, but that's something that he's really good at. So I'm excited to see if they can pull those concepts in going forward. He and Preston Smith and Rashawn Gary were kind of battling all day, and he had a lot of really good reps, but it was also a lot of close calls too, where Preston Smith would start a step inside, and Brian O'Neill would move inside, and then he'd be able to sort of arm over to the outside. But Brian O'Neill's recovery speed is just elite, so he's able to get him and ride him past the arc. But then Preston Smith was able to get a hand on him, and I'm like, is this a win? Is this a loss? Is this a QB hit? So there's a lot of that. But overall, I thought O'Neill was arguably the most impressive. And certainly if you forget the expectations that one of these guys is a Pro Bowler, one of these guys is a rookie, one of these guys is probably going to be a free agent next year, O'Neill was probably the best guy out there. So that him or Cleveland. So I don't know if Shawn or Matt, you'd add anything to that sort of analysis, but that's kind of what I took away from the
Yeah, no, I think that breakdown's great. And we kind of went through the entire offensive line. That's the biggest question. Obviously, we know about the wide receivers already. There wasn't a whole ton of involvement from KJ Osborne or Adam Thielen, but they didn't need it with the performance from Justin Jefferson. So why don't we go ahead and talk about, the most important player on the team, obviously the quarterback, right? Quarterback's the most important player on every team. You mentioned in talking about the pass protection, Kirk Cousins, I thought, had some really nice pocket movement in this game. Obviously, the two notable examples are that first long, the 60-something yarder to Jefferson, where he was able to climb up in the pocket, climb up significantly in the pocket, launch that throw, and, Jefferson turned it into a big gain. And then I also really like the movement on that corner route, but obviously he limited sacks, right? That he took. He only took the 1 sack in the game. He was under pressure a pretty decent amount. I wouldn't say he was under siege the entire game, but he was under a pretty significant amount of pressure. So Shawn, what did you see from Kirk Cousins in terms of the decisions he was making from the scheme that Kevin O'Connell gave him, and what can we expect moving forward from him?
Yeah, I think overall, I know what is Kirk Cousins is such a contentious topic and kind of a thought process. I see both you guys laughing because I know that you guys have heard and felt this question in your bones
welcome to Vikings Twitter talking Kirk Cousins all the time.
I am pro Kirk Cousins football playing, right? I do think he is very good at this sport. I think you guys make really good points in that he limited the mistakes or quote mistakes of others. Really good plays on the defense. I certainly hope we don't have to play Kenny Clark every week, but he knows who he is, right? I think like the way he steps up into that throw, he understands what his body can do. And now watching the kind of high view and seeing, oh, well, maybe on this throw, you could have thrown it to, there's one where they kind of have like an out and then a corner over the top, where I think Jefferson gets a guy turn, or maybe a steal and that gets the safety to turn around. Like, look, I would certainly love to see that. But I'm not sure how necessary that's going to be. I'm a little more curious. Well, how is he going to play when he is down? And it's not like we've never seen him play when he's down before, right? But I think having O'Connell there, who's been with him before, in a system he's comfortable with, and I am a believer in locker room culture and things like that, where maybe he just feels a little bit better in this situation with this head coach, kind of with this voice in his ears. My concern is like, is that the best game that we get from him all year? Which again, it was a good game, but I think that maybe I'm just feeling the Vikings pessimism now, just kind of tempering my optimism on thinking like they're going to be undefeated going into the Bills game. This is going to be great. Like put all of us on ESPN because the Vikings are the only team that anyone needs to talk about with more understanding. Well, look, I don't think he's going to hit every single one of his shots, but then also thinking about it, that O'Connell put shots on the table, which I think that will be hit in the future. So maybe it's look, this over to Jefferson doesn't get hit, but there's going to be another one, a Thielen that will. So I don't have an answer to, and I'm going to, I think, be pondering it all year. And it's something that everyone is going to be tracking. Like, well, can he get maximized? And I think that I candidly think he can, right? In this specific offense with this specific head coach and this group of receivers, I think he can, right? I think he does a great job of throwing the choice route, right? And I think people may look at it as it's this easy thing where it's a really short route. I think it's not, right? Especially at the high school level, it's a really expensive install, expensive time-wise. Like it's hard to understand, like have a quarterback's feet align one way. You have to be understanding of where people are going to break all the time. And we saw the Rams get maximized with Matt Stafford. Now, look, do we expect Kirk Cousins to be Matt Stafford? I don't think anyone's asking that, right? I don't think anyone is positing that in any way. But I am rounding myself in circles, wondering and hoping. And I guess one point, I think it was like 5 yards his average depth of target, which I think was third lowest in the league for week one. And is that the kind of player he is? Maybe, but also as defenses are continuing to be in too high shells, lower depth of target is kind of how you beat a lot of those, right? Not all of us can throw like Josh Allen and just like below the top of a coverage just with our arm. So if we can win in intermediate areas, we have Justin Jefferson there, pass protection that's going to get us, I think, enough time to do that. And if we have to win on yak, maybe that's something that we have to live with. And I think that you guys have lived with the ups and downs a lot longer. I'm just on the high right now, trying to kind of temper myself and prepare myself for the roller coaster. But I think that we should be really encouraged going forward. So yeah, I say nay to all the pessimism.
Absolutely. And I think what you take away from this game is what you said. This offense is designed to give Kirk Cousins those opportunities, and Kirk needs to take them and seize them, right? And I think we saw him do that more than enough in this game, even if he did turn down a couple. That Thielen play was on the first drive that you mentioned. Guess what? He took a check down on that play. I think it was a first down. It got us 8 yards. We continued the drive on. We ended up scoring a touchdown. So taking the check down, getting a positive play is not necessarily the end of the world. Obviously, you'd like somebody to go for the throat time and time again, right? And maybe that's something that Matthew Stafford is going to try to do. Kirk Cousins is not quite that player. He's going to play it a little bit safe if he's not 100% sure about something. I think on the subsequent drive, there was a wheel route to Thielen that he got open on too, and Kirk looked at it. I'm pretty sure Kirk saw it, and then he ended up checking down to KJ Osborne on that same play. Now, that could have been an alert look, right, where he didn't get the alert, so he's not taking it just because there was a guy there and he kind of screwed up the deep third coverage and let Thielen run by him. So, there are kind of layers built into that. One thing I want to pull out that you said that I think is interesting is nobody's expecting Kirk Cousins to be Matthew Stafford. Well, a lot of Vikings fans think that Kirk Cousins is better than Matthew Stafford, and it's kind of an interesting discussion because basically the argument is that Kirk is the argument is the like PFF grade, basically, which the PFF grade for Kirk, I think he was the second highest rated quarterback this week, is about the execution of what the quarterback tried to do. They're not it's not about the read, right? So when Matthew Stafford makes really aggressive plays, he doesn't necessarily get a positive in PFF for making a really aggressive play, where Kirk makes the right play and is able to deliver the ball accurately and moves well in the pocket. And I think we're going to see that continue, but with an offense that continually designs explosives and has good play design and play sequencing, that is what helps unlock Kirk, because it gives him these opportunities time and time again. And when he sees them and trusts them, he can execute on them. Nick, what do you have to add on Kirk? Because it's a great discussion for everybody every time.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with pretty much everything that's been said, so I won't belabor too much. I think one thing I'll say is it's good to finally be in a situation where the scheme is driving Kirk Cousins, and we can rely on Justin Jefferson and the scheme to elevate Kirk, because for a lot of Kirk's career, at least in Minnesota, it's been kind of, can Kirk succeed despite the scheme, not necessarily putting him in the best position to succeed every week. And we've had this offensive coordinator carousel where he's had a new coordinator every single year. And yes, it's been Stefanski to Gary Kubiak to Clint Kubiak to now O'Connell, and those are all similar elements of that sort of Mike Shanahan scheme. But it's been a lot of turnover. So it's nice to be in a situation where I feel like now we can say with some confidence that Kevin O'Connell is going to put Kirk Cousins in a position to succeed. And he can the scheme will elevate Kirk Cousins on top of whatever the supporting cast around him can do. And I will say, you kind of have to tip your hat a little bit to the Packers defense. I mean, some of these shots, like, yes, I would have liked ideally to see Cousins push the ball downfield a little bit more. For a lot of the game, I don't think you necessarily needed to, because the Vikings got up 20-0 pretty early, so you don't necessarily need to push the ball. But I will say, if you're going to criticize Cousins' game, I think the fact that they dialed up so many shots. I mean, they ran play action, I think 43% of dropbacks, and to come away with that with an average intended average depth of target of like 5.3 yards, that's a disappointing disconnect there. I will say that they did a lot of like screens and quick game and other things too there. So it wasn't all shot plays. So that makes sense a little bit. But I will say, this is a very, very talented Packers secondary, and the entire defense is very good. It might not have necessarily looked like it on Sunday, and there were some coverage breakdowns and miscommunications and things that went wrong for the defense, but the talent is there. And there were some of these shot plays that were covered up. There weren't, and as a wide open as Jefferson was on that one cover 3 beater, like that was not the norm. And these are defenders get paid too. So I'd say, I hope that's not the case in every game going forward. I hope we do see some more aggression, because that is something that's kind of been a recurring bad habit of Cousins, is that he likes to take the safer throws over the aggressive downfield throws. But I'm also confident that Kevin O'Connell can coach some more aggression out of Cousins, depending on the looks, and not every team is going to be a too high quarters-based defense the way the Packers are. So I think there's reasons to think that will not necessarily be the case every week going forward.
Yeah, I think that's really a good way to ground us and kind of bring us back to a center here, where the Vikings went against the Packers defense that some people are projecting to be a top 5 defense in the NFL, right? They have a ton of talent, particularly in the secondary with Adrian Amos, Darnell Savage, Jair Alexander, and Eric Stokes. And, it's great that the national conversation after this game is that Jair Alexander is mad because he wasn't allowed to shadow Justin Jefferson, essentially, or get more coverage on Justin Jefferson. We kind of embarrassed the Packers defense, or we embarrassed, Jair Alexander in terms of hurt his pride in terms of his ability of what he was supposed to do on defense there. So that, I think, in general feels good, even if we left a little bit of meat on the bone moving forward. So let's flip over to the other probably national conversation from this game, which is just how abysmal the Packers offense looked without Aaron Rodgers. And I think a large part of that is what the Vikings were able to do schematically on defense. Number one, to limit the deep threats that Aaron Rodgers likes to take. But number two, to kind of scheme it up a little bit, I think, on third downs and get after him in those situations, get some sacks, obviously the 4 sacks in the game. So as we go to the defense, Shawn, why don't you give us the number one key to the Vikings keeping the Packers to only 7 points in this game?
I think that the key is the whole entire system almost. I really do love the Fangio system, that it's continuing to trickle down through the NFL. We hear it all the time, like teams that play in too high, right? But I think that what one flaw for the Packers for now is, look, you don't have Davante Adams, which, okay, that is obvious. But the reason why that's a problem for the offense is you don't have a threat that's an isolation threat that you can say, look, we're in a bind, we can just go here, right? And so something that the Fangio Tree really likes to do, particularly Brandon Staley, is kind of lock the backside and then flood the front side. So if you think of 3x1 or 4x1 sets, that's really, you're leaving one guy on an island, right? And for the Rams, if that's Jalen Ramsey, that's going to be a plus, hopefully, for the Rams every time. Mm-hmm. For the Viking secondary, if you're not as concerned with the threat, right? Like I don't think any cornerback wants to play Davante Adams one-on-one. Yeah. And Davante Adams didn't walk through the door on Sunday, right? So the Vikings, they get to play what's in front of them, and they can get, there's looks where you get 6/4 to the front side, or 5/3 to the front side, and using that weak side safety, usually Harrison Smith rotating in some way, and just flooding the coverage, right? Because I think that the Packers like to do that offensively, right? They want to flood coverages. I think we usually think a flood is just 3 receivers to one side, but they will go to 4 receivers to one side. They had formations that there's 4 people to one side. And so how do you deal with it as a defense? You can flood back, right? But you can't do that if you can't win on the backside. So something that, stresses me out going forward is like AJ Brown next week or Devontae Smith next week. Is that a situation that those guys can get open one-on-one without too much stress, right? And I certainly respect, and I think that, Watson from the Packers is going to catch those long balls this year. We get lucky on play 1. I think there's another clip later on where he is open in my mind, but really just a marriage of the coverage and our pressure systems, where a lot of times, Dontel, he's a send 4 guy. I don't think that he wants to send pressure. He does not want to cut down from his coverage. And when you have Hunter and Smith getting after the quarterback and winning inside as well, that's going to be a good way to do it, right? I think that the Rams-Bills game was an interesting example where you have a team that almost doesn't blitz at all, because if you can win up front with 4, you're going to have a great time on defense, right? So now is the key getting a rush with 4? Maybe, maybe not. But I think winning those individual matchups on the backside that people want to get to is going to be something that I'm really interested to track all year, and would, love to hear more what you guys think about, how Pat Peterson played or how the secondary played as well this week.
Yeah, so I thought Patrick Peterson played really well to start off, but to get back to your point about locking down the backside, there's a very memorable play from last year. I'm pretty sure everybody listening to this will remember it. Vikings-Packers, the game we actually won. In the fourth quarter, we went up, scored a touchdown, and then Marquez Valdez-Scantling hit us with a 75-yarder immediately off of that. On that play, the Vikings, it's a 3x1 with Davante Adams as a single receiver on the backside, and the Vikings have to shadow Harrison Smith over him. So they're running cover 2 essentially to that side. It was quarter half instead of half quarter, right? So they're running cover 2 to that side, cover 4 to the front side, and Marquez Valdez-Scantling with all his speed gets open against Xavier Woods for a wide open touchdown. In this game, to your point, Shawn, the Vikings didn't fear that threat on the backside, so they can use quarters to the backside to allow that quarter safety to come over and help poach on the front side if necessary. I think that's a really good point and a really good add as to the difference when you don't have that major threat.
Yeah, and that's something that the Fangio Tree guys, they just love that. I think they call it tricks, where that backside safety is looking front side. Yeah. And so we call it a half quarter. I like to think about it as that, just because the half is to the passing strength. So whichever comes first in your half quarter or quarter half is what is going to the passing strength. But on the backside, it's not really quarters, right? Like it really is, you're going to have a cornerback locked in and usually a linebacker locked in on the running back to flood that front side. And that weak safety, I don't think it's an easy position to play in this defense. And I'm glad that, it was a pleasure watching tape and seeing Harrison Smith fly all over the place. And they use that same concept even in their fire zones, where they play their fire zones where you're sending 5 and only have 6 in coverage in different ways, right? It'll feel like man coverage, but then you could have Harrison Smith kind of attack that threat. So as NFL offenses continue to think of, well, how do we get in 3x1 sets? How do we get our best receiver off of their best cornerback? Let's put him in the slot. Let's put him at number 3. You being able to use that backside safety is huge because it takes a lot of stress off your linebackers. But I do love, watching Kendricks play this week, I thought was so much fun. It was really, I feel like, my first time just looking at him, carrying verticals and just feeling like this is a guy who is really, really good at this, and seeing how well, if they think that Kendricks can kind of cap, or not cap those verticals, but really trail on those well, maybe Smith can even do something else. And again, I try not to think too much about Sunday already. I'm loving, just basking in the glory of 1-0, but the Eagles matchup really stresses me out.
Yeah, that'll be really a test of Jalen Hurts as a passer. But Nick, what did you want to say on just the coverage structure?
Oh, I just wanted to say, like, as many great Justin Jefferson plays in that game, the one play that really sticks out to me was that 4th down stop that Kendricks came away with. And like, Shawn, this is your introduction to Eric Kendricks. Like, that was just a vintage Eric Kendricks, like being able to press Bob Tunyon on 4th and short, Packers final attempt to get more points on the board, and be able to carry the vertical up the seam and then get a hand on the ball to break it up. Is like, man, there aren't very many linebackers that can do that. And to see Kendrick still doing it at 30 years old is really impressive to see. I thought LaFleur is, I was really interested to see how LaFleur is going to adapt his offense now that Davante Adams is not going to be the guy they're going to have as the first read on everything. So, and you saw a lot of that. He loves to get 3-4 for the strong side and attack you that way and get numbers there. I mean, I was kind of impressed by the way the Vikings were able to take it on. I thought Patrick Peterson, as much as he got exposed, I think, declining athleticism on that first play of the game, his smarts, I think, stood out here. And I think he sorted through a lot of traffic really well in ways that maybe some of the other defenders, I'm thinking particularly of Chandon Sullivan and Jordan Hicks, didn't throughout the game. And the way he was able to sort of fill in, whether it was a quick swing pass, or whether it was a screen, or whether it was, something else fast to the flat, like be able to fill in the lane there. So I think all that helped a lot. But yeah, it does give me a little bit of pause thinking about, like, okay, well, this was a very undermanned Packers offense without both its starting tackles and without its number one wide receiver, even after the fact that they traded Davante Adams in the offseason and didn't do a lot to replace him. So we're going in, thinking to next week, we're going to the exact opposite situation where, the quarterback isn't necessarily a future Hall of Famer, but they have loads of weapons. I mean, I think the Eagles are up there with most talented weapons in the NFL between their tight end and their wide receiver depth. So that'll be a different story, and it'll be really interesting to see if they can still hold up, or if they're going to need to start, playing, the half quarter to be able to, be able to deal with sort of how they get AJ Brown, Devontae Smith open on either side. So that'll be an interesting test going forward.
Yeah, so one thing you brought up there, Nick, I want to pull out. First of all, Patrick Peterson, especially in the second half, on those plays to the flat, I think did a great job. The half quarter helps enable that, I believe, because you have Patrick Peterson playing on the outside. He is still flat control, right? It's cover 2 to that side, so he's playing underneath first and letting, well, it's kind of a mix, but essentially he's letting number 1 go vertical to the deep safety in that scenario if there's something quick underneath, potentially, if they call it out. So that allowed him to drive, and he did a really good job with physicality to get through blocks and actually make the plays on the players that are being there in the flat. However, that flat area, I think, was kind of the biggest issue for the Vikings in pass coverage in that game. Obviously, on the drive where they got stopped on 4th and 1 in the goal line, I think they hit pretty much 3 consecutive plays to the right flat, right, where they were kind of exploiting the linebackers. Jordan Hicks was once, and then there was kind of a miscommunication between Eric Kendricks and Chandon Sullivan. So, Shawn, can you run us through why the flat is kind of a weakness in the defense and what the Vikings maybe can do to, help that flat coverage, or if it's just something we're going to have to live with for the other benefits of the coverage that we've talked about it previously?
Yeah, I think that every pass coverage has a weakness, right? Like, you play a lot of these coverages to put an umbrella over the offense and force them to throw in those shorter areas. I do think that the Packers, they get paid too, and they do deserve credit for doing what they can to manipulate what was happening in the flat. So you kind of have 2 main ways to do it. Say if you have 2 receivers to a side and a back there, so it's kind of really 3 receivers down there. And if you have the back out fast, it's, you call it your fast 3 rules, right? So what do? Do we bump our linebackers' responsibility to the slot, and the slot works to the flat? Or do we have the back chase, or the backer chase the back, right? And so there's a clip where I think it was Aaron Jones on a 3rd down, where it was an incomplete pass, where they had 4 to that side. Now that's an example. Well, maybe that Hicks has to bump that to Kendricks, or you have to know your rules, which is on the same way we started this, where it was so cool to see Justin Jefferson score that first touchdown and get that gritty going to start the season. You force the defense to communicate, right? And doing it at full speed. And the way the Packers did it, I think, was just really smart, where you have your number 2 receiver kind of slamming down. So the slot's head is thinking, okay, well, I need to carry this and match this in some sort of way. And I'm inadvertently really screening the linebacker from getting there. So it'll be interesting to see, what kind of happens in terms of, well, how do teams attack that? Well, especially with the Eagles, like they're going to attack the flat, especially, we are all going to be so stressed, like watching all the play action, like all of the slide blocks, everything kind of sifting back into one way. So I wouldn't necessarily just call it, oh, this is like a grand weakness, but it's a hinge point in the defense where you have to have a rule and the offense can manipulate that in some sort of way, right? They can force you to either trade responsibilities on the fly or do something where you can open it up where it's stressful, right? I think, Kendricks is, of course, a fantastic player. There's going to be times where he can't get to that spot, right? Whether he has to work through some traffic. And I guess the hope is that, well, maybe you have your second guy coming down there quickly and stopping that. But every time you make an adjustment in coverage, you are taking away from someone else, right? So if I have my safety buzzing down and really being like, look, we need to stop this, then we're leaving guys on islands outside and really stressing ourselves out deep. So I personally, I'm, I guess, more comfortable with, look, like if they get to the flat, let's tip our cap, right? Like they're going to make some nice plays there, but I would much rather have that than watch 80 yards going downfield.
I'm totally on board there. I think, giving up a little bit in the flat on a few drives, forcing the offense to dink and dunk its way down the field is very much preferable to giving up big plays, which we had a propensity for last year, especially in the 2-minute drills. So it's kind of a trade-off, but I very much agree with that. Especially as you kind of got on this earlier, like Patrick Peterson and Cameron Dantzler, I think, are fine players and played like NFL starters in this game, but they're not lockdown guys that you expect to shut down receivers time after time. So we're not leaving them on islands as much in this scenario. So I think that is really helpful kind of with the umbrella coverages. I want to flip it over to kind of the run side of the game of the Packers. And, the two biggest focal points of the Packers offense, honestly, their two best skill position players are both running backs, in my opinion, in Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon. We got a pretty hefty dose of A.J. Dillon in this game. He got a lot of yardage after contact. That's who he is as a player. He's kind of a massive player and hard to bring down. But I think in general, the Vikings, kind of force that run on the ground. And, something we see with this defense that's a new look is even when we're running cover 3, we rotate down post snap, right? So we have both safeties 10 yards beyond the line of scrimmage pretty much every snap of the game. Shawn, can you run us through kind of what that does for a defensive run defense, how that makes it more difficult on the front, but also how the Vikings were able to execute to play pretty well against the run game?
Yep, I was really pleasantly surprised with how the Vikings played up front. I had a lot of clips, Tomlinson and Phillips just playing well there, right? And you can allow yourself on the back end to do certain fun things if you can win on the front end, right? Like if we only have 11 players, we can't get flagged for 12 players on the field every time. So you're going to have to make some sort of separation, right? It's a numbers game and it's a leverage game. And if we take players out of the box in certain ways, then we're going to have to add to their responsibilities, right? And one thing that gave the Vikings a little bit of trouble was when the Packers got into heavier sets and they ran their pin and pull scheme, which basically, add two tight ends are washing down. You see the two guards kind of run up and pull on the outside. And the Eagles are going to run that against the Vikings. They ran it against the Lions. I think it makes absolute sense to run it against this defense. But you're asking less players to do more jobs, right? So whereas old school football, you think, well, there's 9 gaps and these are all the gaps and everyone's looking forward and directly covering them. It's different where, sometimes maybe the nose has to hold this player up and kind of peek to the left, peek to the right. And we see we're going to manipulate things in a certain way to go based on what the offense is doing, right? Sometimes it doesn't make full sense to dedicate an entire player like all the way away from the field, right? Where we can get that guy into coverage, instead have him coming down, from depth with like attacking the line as opposed to kind of just running back, stressing himself out. So something has to be done up front. And I think that the Vikings are a team that can do it because I think they can win inside the interior and they have Kendricks to really erase, not mistakes, but look, you can just go back and watch the game. Like people are just eating up double teams, right? And if you can keep the linebackers clean, the linebackers can kind of play leverage fits and really fit off the ball as opposed to saying, hey, I have to be in this A gap right now. And look, you're going to see probably less, gap shoot tackle for losses where people are just like slamming down and tackling for -2. But if the offense is only gaining 2 yards every single time they run the ball, I think that's something you live with. And just like I hope that, the Vikings don't have to play Kenny Clark every week, really hope we don't have to see A.J. Dillon every single week, because I think that there were a lot of times where the Vikings were in good position and, he's going to gain extra yards, but definitely encouraging from the Vikings, seeing how they were up front. And, I don't know about the Packers line personnel and such, but, I hope it's something that can continue and going to be interesting to watch against an Eagles offensive line that I really like as well. But very basic concept of, look, if we can win with a lighter box, we can do more fun things on the back end. Right. And if we have to devote Harrison Smith to the box every single time, that's going to kind of uncover things on the back end. So the hope is that we can stay back and still cover the run in a good way.
Yeah, and there weren't too many major busts in the run game. Aaron Jones had that one really explosive run on pin and pull, and that was kind of designed to beat the way the Vikings were playing, because on that snap they were playing with basically a 5-1 front and that works really well against wide zone structures, but against gap plays, it's really difficult when you have that many players on the line, because half of them basically don't matter with the down blocking that's going on. They're pretty much washed out of the play, and then you have an advantage at the point of the attack with your pullers. So that is an important aspect. But something Shawn brought out there, I think, was the play of the defensive tackles and the defensive line in general. Nick, do you want to talk a little bit about Dalvin Tomlinson, Harrison Phillips, maybe even get into the pass rush from Dalvin Tomlinson as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was one of the big questions I had going into the season was, we lost Michael Pierce, was just a phenomenal. I mean, Vikings fans unfortunately didn't get to see much of him because of COVID and then some health issues, but just a phenomenally strong, stout run blocker, kind of a true zero tech. And so losing him, replacing him with Harrison Phillips, who was almost more of like a rotational type nose for Buffalo. Was he ready to step up and be the guy, be the gap and a half to kind of guy, or at least be able to take on extra responsibilities, be able to make up for playing being out gapped occasionally in the run game. And it was really encouraging stuff from Phillips and from Tomlinson, I think, in the run game. The second level defenders, I think, have some stuff to clean up, but from the guys up front, I think I was really encouraged to see what they were able to do. I think there are a lot. I mean, Phillips, I think, has phenomenal contact balance. He's very quick out of his stance. He's like smart. He knows what he's doing, and he knows kind of how to keep his pads low and be able to sort of put the pressure points on when he's having to take on multiple blocks. And so I think both him and Tomlinson too, there were questions because, before he was kind of a pure 3-tech. Now he's moving back more to, base, defensive end, 4-eye type stuff. And it's you don't think of it as that big of a difference, but it kind of is. So how would he be able to hold up? And Thompson also had some really good blocks. And it's nice I feel a lot more confident after this game, knowing that, so much of this defense hinges on, can your defensive linemen actually, execute this scheme? Can you live out of too high? And you really can't if your defensive lineman can't keep up with them. I mean, this was the Brandon Staley problem, they've got so many studs in the back end, but they just didn't have the guys up front to be able to execute a lot of this too high stuff, and they got gashed in the run game because of it. So I think it was really encouraging to be able to see Tomlinson and Phillips. I think the sweeps are stuff that they're going to have to improve on, but I also think this game kind of shows why they drafted Lewis Cine, why they drafted Brian Asamoah, guys who can just scream, come downhill and fly sideline to sideline range with Asamoah, or scream downhill from the too high alignment with Cine. So it will be exciting to see if those guys can to start play in the game. I think for now you kind of want experience, because I will take a guy getting to his gap a little late as opposed to a guy getting to the wrong gap, which is the problem we saw with Asamoah, especially in the preseason. But you see how much that range, that athleticism, that ability to trigger downhill matters. And the Booth too, is a similar kind of skill set there. So to the extent you saw issues, I think Bynum played well, but there were also plays where he tackled the wrong guy, or he kind of flew past and wasn't able to make the tackle coming downhill. You see kind of why those prototypes, why they drafted the guys they did for this defense. Just touching on Thompson really quickly in pass protection, I thought it was really interesting what they did with him, because they lined him up as wide as like a 7-tech as a pass rusher. And so, he is an interior defensive lineman, but they lined him up as a 5-tech. I don't know if that was a matchup specific thing, because these offense tackles were backups, and maybe they saw something on film that they were particularly susceptible to power to bull rushes, because we also saw that with Patrick Jones had a couple really exceptional bull rushes on these backup offensive tackles. So maybe that was just something that they scouted and saw. But I mean, Tomlinson was a really effective pass rusher. I mean, he was I think per ESPN, he had the third best pass rush win rate as a defensive tackle, which is my favorite stat because it's kind of just based on do you get past like your blocker, which doesn't always. It's not a substitute for actually watching the film, but in this case, I think it really showcased like he was dominant. Like and it wasn't just like bull rushes. He's very quick out of his stance. He's got a phenomenal arm over that he really knows how to use, and he was able to like basically beat all sorts of from every different technique, from every different alignment, and going up against every single person on the Packers defensive line, win from a lot of different ways. So that was really encouraging to see, because we talk a lot about Danielle Hunter and Zadarius Smith, but if Tomlinson can keep that kind of pass rush production up, that really, that adds a whole nother layer to the pass rush potential of this Vikings defensive line. So really encouraging stuff from the line, even if the linebackers, second level defenders, got some stuff to clean up.
Yeah, and on that point, just to go and take a step back to look at passing situations that the Vikings had, we only put one defensive tackle on the field. Primarily, that was Dalvin Tomlinson. In some cases, there were a couple snaps where we had Harrison Phillips, and I think that'll be kind of a rotational thing as we go along. But the key there is that with 4 linemen, that means they had 3 edge rushers on the field in Harrison Smith, in Zadarius Smith, in Danielle Hunter, and DJ Wanham was the third one. So they did a lot of very interesting things with those guys. Putting Dalvin Tomlinson over the tackle, and that the Zadarius Smith sack, his first sack, they had him and Danielle Hunter on the same side. That's a really scary combination for an opposing offensive line to go against. They also were willing to put mug linebackers over the center in that case. Eric Kendricks was mugged over the center. Jordan Hicks was mugged over the center in some scenarios. In those, so you have 5 guys on the line of scrimmage. That forces the offensive line to make a protection call where they're accounting for that guy in front of it. That means that they have to slide in one direction. It seemed like the Packers chose to slide to the defensive tackle side, the Dalvin Tomlinson side a lot, to help out potentially with that power. And then you have one-on-ones for Zadarius Smith and Danielle Hunter, which is an absolutely fantastic situation for your defense to be in, right? So that helped create that first Zadarius Smith sack, which helped kind of set the tone for the game for the Vikings. It also helped later on. Also, we moved those edge rushers around a ton. We had Zadarius Smith's play over the center. We had DJ Wanham play over the center. We had Patrick Jones play over the center. From the defensive line game and the defensive line alignment, Shawn, anything you want to pull out there?
Yeah, I think that Fangio is definitely not a huge pressure guy. So I think where things that you've seen with Mike Zimmer, you're just candidly not going to see as many of those kind of big blitzes. And I think that Donatello is carrying that over, where similarly how we are loving O'Connell putting Jefferson in the best situation, like, look, let's put Hunter and Smith in the best situations too. I think having them over a guard is something that you're going to love every time, right? So it's going to be something where hopefully, people are not getting frustrated. Oh, why aren't we blitzing? Why aren't we blitzing? Just remember that 4-yard checkdowns are better than 40-yard touchdowns, right? We want to keep our coverage shell over the top. And because of that, we're not going to be able to be blitzing all the time, right? But as you said, when you have such talented rushers, if you can get home with 4, you're going to have a good time for sure. So, maybe less super exotic blitzes or safeties coming down off the roof and kind of blitzing off the edge, but games to get those 4 guys beating the offense's 5 for sure.
Yep, and let's not downplay the impact that Mike Zimmer had on this defense, right? Obviously, he was a phenomenal third down blitz designer, probably the best third down design defensive mind that the NFL has. Maybe he's only competing with Bill Belichick there, but I think the way the Vikings are using these edge rushers is exciting and a different flavor for us to see, where we can still be very good on third down even if we get through that to that through a different lens. Why don't I pass it around, and we'll start with you, Nick. Any final thoughts on the Vikings offense or defense? Any players you wanted to shout out from this game, just to wrap up the Packers game?
One person talking about the pass rush, I just want to shout out. Shawn, I'm thinking of that clip you shared of Hunter's fake spin move. It's so great to see Danielle Hunter back healthy. And he's such a fun pass rusher to watch because he's so unorthodox. He varies the pace of his pass rush. Like, he goes so slow and then goes so fast. And he has such weird moves where he'll it's like a rip move, but he's really yanking your outside hand down while he rips around you, and it's almost like a cross chop or something, but not quite. And he does the weirdest things, and he was dominant. I know he only had the one sack, but like, he was getting chipped on a lot of snaps and was able to like just bolt past one guy and then swim over the next guy. So really fun to see him healthy. We haven't seen him healthy, fully 100% healthy in quite some time. He missed all of 2020 and a lot of last year. So was really fun to see him back. And I think the big key to this whole defensive scheme, you talk about the defensive line and the run game and how that unlocks being able to run too high. Well, being able to drop 7 into coverage and have numbers advantages on both sides, you can only do that if you can win with 4. And so being able to keep Hunter healthy and being able to make the most of him is going to be really important, I think. So being able to see Hunter healthy and dominate guys and get some sack production, that was really fun to see. So excited to see more of that.
Yeah, Shawn, any final thoughts from you to wrap it up?
Yeah, just giving, Dalvin Tomlinson just a little more love, just really fun watching and seeing and thinking, well, who's number 94? Why does he keep doing so well? And it's just great news, as Nick said, like you have to be able to win with less people to be able to play some of that stuff on the back end. And really excited, Harrison Smith, where he's doing more kind of looking front side as opposed to blitzing and screaming off the edge. And I think he's really played well and is exciting. And then, I'm rooting for Captain Kirk. I'm going to continue to root for him. I think we continue to get more from him, and just excited to kind of see him versus Philly.
Yeah, and I'm going to shout out Justin Jefferson. I mean, we dedicated a ton of time to him on this podcast. There are a couple things I want to get to on him. Actually, the main thing I want to get to on him that we didn't get really a chance to talk about because we talked more about his usage is just his absolutely absurd body control. I think that, and he had 2 plays where he didn't quite get down. The one was called a push off. I don't really think it was a push off. He didn't quite get 2 feet down, but I think if he had caught those plays, he would have had a perfect sheet in terms of the number of receptions he had in the game. Like, he would have been 11 for 11. I think he had 9 receptions, on 11 targets. And he would have had an additional touchdown and an additional 20 or 30 yards, right? So that's ridiculous. The one play he made over Darnell Savage, where again, it was on a deep over, just his ability to go back to the ball because it was a little bit behind, high point the ball, and then turn his body away from Darnell Savage to make that catch and to shield himself, to shield the ball right from the defender is really ridiculously impressive. Like, that's ballerina like in the air. And then on that second touchdown, his ability to simply stay in bounds, and there were a couple other examples of this too, his ability to stay in bounds and get up the sideline to get additional yardage is really impressive. So just kind of salivating over Justin Jefferson's game. I mean, I think he deserves it after the performance that he had. So
yeah, we talk so much about what a good route runner he is, but like his body control, his ability at the catch point, and I think his ability after the catch all kind of go underrated. He's just a very complete receiver, and you saw a lot of that. I mean, that catch he had in the flat where it was, I think was Preston Smith maybe, that he lined up on in the slot, and it was a choice route, but he wound up taking it for like 22 yards. Getting explosives out of like quick choice routes, it's like that's kind of Jefferson's like his ability to get upfield, to like feel the zones while with his back to the defense and get upfield and be able to create yards, being able to, there were 2 defenders he had to sneak past, and he had to knife past one and then dive over the other to get into that for that second touchdown. So just all the things he's able to do is just really impressive, and it's hard to find all the airspace to cover all of it. But it's really excited to have an offense where like it's constructed about like maximizing him. Like there are clear out routes so that we can get the ball to him. So hopefully we get to see more of that next week.
Yeah, absolutely awesome stuff from Jefferson. So that's going to wrap it up for this episode of Kindred Skulls. Thank you so much to Shawn at Syed Schemes. Shawn, you were a fantastic guest here. Go check out his work at the Daily Norseman this year, and go check him out on Twitter, because all of these plays that we're talking about, you can pretty much see there, the all 22 version. So it's great. My co-host Nick Olson is at Nick Olson NFL. I'm Matt Freese. You can find me at Fries Football. Our co-host Gregg Blake. Just a programming note: we are going to record another episode this week. Gregg will be there, and it's going to be previewing the Eagles game. So you can catch him at You've Been Gregged on Instagram mainly. He also has a Twitter. Kindred Skulls is at Kindred Skulls on Twitter. You can find us on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. We're also on YouTube. Just search for Kindred Skulls on YouTube. So, this was awesome. We had a ton of fun breaking down the Packers' amazing win against the Vikings. Skull Vikings.
Let's go.
Let's ride.
Goal, baby.
Another first round corner wouldn't do us any harm. Oh, another first round corner wouldn't do us any harm. Oh, another first round corner wouldn't do us any harm. And we'll all cheer on behind, and we'll score the